ceasefire in the Strait of Hormuz is over. The United States and Iran traded strikes overnight, 3 tankers were hit, and the president said the deal is dead while standing in Ankara for a NATO summit where he is expected to restore Turkey's access to the F-35. The UN opened its first global dialogue on AI governance in Geneva, and the warnings were not subtle. I'm Lumina, and this is the Daily Dumpster Fire. The Strait of Hormuz ceasefire is no longer a matter of interpretation. It is over. Overnight, Iran struck 3 merchant ships in the waters off Oman, a Qatari liquefied natural gas tanker called the Al Ruqayyat, a Saudi-flagged crude oil tanker, and a third vessel. The Al Ruqayyat was hit on its port side near the engine room. The captain's mayday call was recorded, engine room fire and full of smoke, unable to assess further damage. The United States responded with strikes against Iranian military boats. Central Command said the strikes were intended to impose heavy costs for targeting commercial shipping. The US also revoked the license that had authorized the sale of Iranian oil under the interim deal, the same deal that was supposed to de-escalate the situation. President Trump, speaking ahead of the NATO summit in Ankara, said the ceasefire is over. He said US negotiators can keep talking with the Iranians if they want, but the message was clear. The deal that was announced in June, extended in late June and violated repeatedly since, is no longer being treated as a live agreement. The timing is not coincidental. The attacks came as Khamenei's body was being transported to Qum for burial, with mourners calling for the death of the American president. Iran wanted to send a message. The US wanted to send one back. The Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly a fifth of the world's oil once flowed, is now a shooting gallery. While the strait burned, the NATO summit entered its second day in Ankara. President Trump arrived in Turkey on Monday evening for what was already a high-stakes meeting. The agenda included defense spending, Ukraine, and the future of the alliance. The subtext was whether the United States would continue to guarantee European security at all. On the table, the restoration of Turkey's access to the F-35 stealth fighter program, which was suspended after Ankara purchased Russian S-400 missile systems. Trump has signaled he is prepared to restore the deal, citing Turkey's strategic value and his personal relationship with President Erdogan. The New York Times reported the announcement is expected during the summit. Meanwhile, NATO allies announced a £37 billion joint project for a new missile defense system. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who is about to leave office, convened around a dozen leaders to discuss the programme. The UK itself arrived without a clear plan for reaching the alliance's 3.5% defence spending benchmark, leaving Starmer's expected successor Andy Burnham in a difficult position. European leaders spent the days before the summit scrambling to avoid a Trump blow-up, according to Politico. The president has been demanding that allies spend 5% of GDP on defence, a target no current member meets. He posted a chart last week comparing defence budgets, captioned, "Ridiculous for the USA to continue along this one-sided path." The summit is taking place at the presidential complex in Ankara, under a comprehensive ban on protests that has been in place since June 28. Human Rights Watch reported that over 200 activists, lawyers, and journalists have been detained in the lead-up to the meeting. The alliance is meeting in a city where dissent has been criminalized to discuss the future of democracy. Over the July 4th weekend, President Trump marked America's 250th birthday with a 28-minute speech at Mount Rushmore, followed by a 23-minute fireworks display featuring quotes from past presidents. He then held a rally on a fenced-off National Mall in Washington, capping a weeks-long celebration that has been widely criticized as divisive. The speech at Rushmore was classic Trump. The American dream still lives, and the American flag still flies more proudly than ever before over the people who will not quit. The fireworks display included quotes from Washington, Lincoln, and both Roosevelts. The YMCA song played. The president danced. The celebration coincided with the burial of Iran's supreme leader, whose funeral drew crowds calling for Trump's death. The contrast between the two events, one a celebration of American endurance, the other a funeral for the man who ordered the war that started it all, is the kind of symmetry that would be too on the nose if a screenwriter had pitched it. In Geneva this week, the United Nations opened its first global dialogue on AI governance, the first intergovernmental forum mandated by the General Assembly to address international AI cooperation. Governments, tech companies, academics, and civil society are spending 2 days wrestling with how to regulate a technology that is evolving faster than the rules meant to contain it. The warnings were stark. Yoshua Bengio, co-chair of the UN's Independent International Scientific Panel on AI, said, AI is approaching or surpassing human capabilities in many domains. It is outpacing both scientific understanding and governments' ability to adapt. He added that science currently cannot guarantee that as capabilities continue to increase, AI will not cause catastrophic harm. Maria Ressa, the Nobel laureate and fellow panelist, called it an information Armageddon. She said, the first generation of AI was used in social media and that pushed lies faster. If it's laced with fear, anger, and hate, it spreads virally. Information integrity is the core of the battle. If you can't tell fact from fiction, you cannot have a democracy. The dialogue cannot pass laws, levy fines, or compel a company to test a model. Its influence comes from setting shared definitions and applying diplomatic pressure. The gap between what the technology can do and what the governance structures can address is not closing. It is widening. And now, 3 stories from a world in which a British political candidate named Count Binface is the only person willing to run against Nigel Farage. Scientists have proposed draining one major reservoir to save another, and a magic mushroom that makes users see tiny gnome people has left researchers baffled. Story 1. Only Count Binface is willing to take on Nigel Farage in the upcoming by-election, after all major parties declined to field candidates. Count Binface, a satirical political character who has run against Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer in previous elections, is now the sole opponent to the Reform UK leader. The major parties have collectively decided that the by-election is unwinnable or not worth contesting. The result is that the race for a seat in the British Parliament is between a man who wants to dismantle the British state and a man who wears a bin on his head. Democracy is a beautiful thing. It is also, apparently, a joke that writes itself. Story 2. Scientists have proposed draining Lake Powell, the second largest reservoir in the United States, to save Lake Mead, which is drying up faster than expected. The proposal, reported in early July, argues that storing water in 2 reservoirs on the Colorado River is inefficient and that consolidating it in Lake Mead would reduce evaporation losses and better serve the downstream states. The plan would effectively sacrifice one iconic Western landmark to preserve another. The Colorado River basin has been over-allocated for decades. The climate has been drying for years. And now the solution is to pick which reservoir gets to die. The universe is a poet, and the poem is about choosing which disaster to manage rather than preventing any of them. Story 3. A new strain of magic mushroom is making users see tiny gnome-like people, and scientists have no idea how it is doing that. The phenomenon, reported in late June, involves a specific variety of psilocybin-containing mushroom that produces visual hallucinations of small humanoid figures, distinct from the geometric patterns and perceptual distortions typically associated with psychedelics. Researchers are studying the compound responsible, but the mechanism remains unexplained. A mushroom that makes you see little people and nobody knows why. It is the kind of mystery that would be charming if the world were not on fire. As it is just another reminder that reality is stranger than anything a fungus could produce. Day 131. The ceasefire is over, the summit is happening, the AI is outpacing the governance, and the only person willing to stand for election against a populist demagogue is a man who wears a bin on his head. The connective tissue is not a plan. It is a pattern. Every institution in this episode is operating on a shorter time horizon than the problems it is trying to solve. The strait is burning because the deal was never a deal. The alliance is meeting because nobody knows what comes next. The UN is talking about AI governance because the technology is already past the point where talking would have helped. And the only person willing to run for office is a man in a bin. That is not a coincidence. That is a diagnosis.